have trouble connecting. My name is Chris Wolz. This is my first time on one of these calls for the Drupal working group with ESIP, so thank you for the chance to join. And we have a great topic lined up that we're going to cover, and so on behalf of Adam, let me just kick it off. Today we're going to be giving a presentation and hopefully having a lot of good questions and answers about the development of the GlobalChange.gov website. If we could go to the second slide. We'll give some background about the project. We'll talk about the client, the US GlobalChange Research Project, and the approach for the project. We'll talk about the methodology, which I know is of great interest to this group, around the technical details of how we approached it, but we'll briefly touch on how we went through strategy, design, and then development and hosting, and ultimately launch. We'll mention what might be next for this project, and then hopefully spend most of our time in questions and answers. So today, again, presenting, I'm Chris Wolz. I'm with ForumOne Communications. We're a digital agency that worked on this project. With me is Keenan Holloway and Sarah Nguyen, from our technical team. And we're also really pleased to have Glynis Lau here, who is the Chief of Staff for the National Climate Assessment with the US GlobalChange Research Program. Again, we're ForumOne Communications, or ForumOne. We're a digital agency that focuses on digital solutions for organizations working on policy issues. And we've been doing that for about 17, 18 years. On this project, we had several partners. Again, we were serving as a consultant to USGCRP and UCAR. Anti-Static is a design company that partnered with us on this. A large piece of the project, also the NCA report content itself, was designed and developed by a company called Habitat 7, and then developed out by a group, GCIS. So they all were involved. One additional note, the GlobalChange.gov website is an umbrella site that talks about the overall Global Change Research program and the specific content for the third National Climate Assessment Report, which just came out this spring. The actual pages presenting the report content is on a subdomain, nca2014.globalchange.gov. That was developed and is a slightly different subsite within the main site developed by the Habitat 7 team. Let me introduce Glynis to give a little background about the climate assessment and the USGCRP.
Hi, everybody. So one of the things driving us as USGCRP, and I'll explain a little bit about our organization in a minute, but one of the main motivations that we had for working with ForumOne to launch a new website was the development and release of the third National Climate Assessment. The third National Climate Assessment included contributions from over 300 authors, including government and non-government scientists and experts. The report incorporated comments from thousands of people and organizations, as well as numerous technical inputs and workshops. And I hope that you've heard about it by now, because we've had a lot of press articles since the White House released it on May 6th this year. The assessment focuses on what we know now about past and present climate change, about projected future changes in climate, and about climate change impacts on specific regions of the U.S. and sectors of the economy and society, such as infrastructure, human health, and agriculture. In short, the assessment tells us what's happening to the U.S. as a result of climate change and how we know. So when it came time to develop a new website, we wanted to make sure that it focused a lot on the NCA, but also made the work of the whole program very useful. And our job at the US Global Change Research Program, or USGCRP, was to coordinate the development, production, and release of the assessments. USGCRP itself is a fairly small federal entity that coordinates a much larger program. We coordinate and integrate the research related to climate change that's conducted across 13 federal agencies. Those agencies range from the very science-focused agencies like NASA and NSF to agencies that focus more on decisions and implementation like the Health and Human Services, Department of Transportation, and Department of Defense. USGCRP itself, the small office here, is overseen by a subgroup of the National Science and Technology Council and also by the White House Office of Science and Technology. So USGCRP, and when I say USGCRP, I mean the 13 federal agencies that collaborate together. We have a number of goals. The overriding one is to empower the nation with global change science. Global change includes climate change, but also includes processes like global development and land use change that can interact with climate to affect the Earth system. The USGCRP accomplishes this goal with a four-pronged approach. The first is to advance the multidisciplinary science of global change by coordinating across all the agencies. Secondly, we work to use that science to support decisions on adapting to climate change and mitigating the effects of climate change. Third, we work to conduct a sustained and engaging process to assess the impacts of climate change and responses in the U.S. and globally. That's where the NCA fits in. And finally, we work to communicate with and educate a variety of stakeholders about the program's global change research. For that last goal, communicating and educating, redesigning our website, globalchange.gov, was especially important. So our objectives with this project, as I mentioned, one of our main goals is taking advantage of the release of the NCA report to launch a new website. Our team members down at KICS NC and Habitat 7 were working hard on making some really nice pages for the NCA, a really nice site that showcased that report specifically. And we wanted to be able to use globalchange.gov to support the dissemination of that report. We also wanted it to be able to support future reports and other agency content. And we knew that a smooth launch of the entire package was really critical to getting the NCA report in the hands of as many people as possible. We also wanted to use the opportunity to provide distinct pathways into the report from different parts of globalchange.gov, no matter where a user might have found the site. We wanted to showcase content derived from the NCA, other materials or handouts. And it was also important to us that the site be very beautiful and truly accessible and enticing for the various audiences for climate change impact information, both globalchange.gov itself and the sub-site at NCA 2014.
Thanks, Glynis. I mean, briefly, the approach we took to the project was in two big steps. We had an initial project that was strategy and design that took about 6 months and really worked with the USGCRP team to understand what the new site needed to do for them and how it needed to weave together content, long-standing content as well as the content from this new report. And then the development of the project was completed in about 5 months, including a lot of content migration, the ongoing hosting, a lot of with the site getting a lot of attention. Let me say a few words about strategy and design, and then we can get to the technical issues, which I think are probably of most interest to all of you. Again, the objective here, we had to incorporate content from the NCA 3 report, from the Global Change Information System, a database of federal climate research information, and other content that had been on the globalchange.gov site for a long time. We were starting with an old site that had looked kind of dated and really wasn't serving the needs of USGCRP any longer. Just some familiar things we did along the way was conceptual wireframes, and then a more detailed HTML prototype just to make sure we had the structure, the content, the usability well defined. We then moved on to the visual design and then really took an approach of using very big, strong visuals to create an emotional connection to this content, really marrying scientific information with some emotion-grabbing visuals. And we had the interesting challenge on this project of really speaking to varied audiences, non-scientific audiences such as the public and the media, to get them introduced to the issue at an appropriate level, but also we knew that a large share of the audience for this was an audience that is pretty savvy about the issue and the science and the policy. So you could see here in this schematic of the climate change understanding page that we took a layered approach with, starting with a general intro, what's happening, ramifications of the issue of climate change, and then getting into more detail and leading people into more detailed content. So it was deliberately to meet the needs of these different audiences. And similarly with the regions and topics page, you could go to the next slide, where again we start out with a broad overview and then give people the ability to drill in to see climate change impacts and issues at a regional level, which we knew would be of interest to some audiences, and for other audiences, and let them find it information at a topical level if that's their professional interest. The site, again, had other ways to allow people to explore content, a variety of resources. We had a lot of data and multimedia to incorporate. Again, for people who are looking for more detail, we really wanted to provide some depth for them. And then, real importantly, one of the key objectives for the project was to make it available and very usable across a variety of screen sizes. So we made it, using a responsive design approach, we made it very friendly for mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, and various screen sizes, using a newly developed ForumOne UX custom Drupal theme. We can say more about that if it's of interest. Let me turn it over now to Sarah and Keenan to talk some about the technical approach we took.
Sure. So into the technical overview, essentially we started off with the way the site looked in its older form. And of course, the site included a limited data migration. The existing, or the site previously was done in Joomla. So of course we tried to use the structure of how the content was already broken up in Joomla, as well as some of the various RSS feeds that are offered by that tool to try to pull in as much of the content as we could. Most of the content was pulled in with feeds through various feeds importers. And also there was some content that we sort of had to come up with clever tools to sort of scrape out of the existing site. And for that, we used custom scripts just for sort of scraping the site and grabbing the components that we needed. Some of the notable modules that we use, and these are sort of modules we use in general for the majority of our projects, are, of course, the Chaos Tool Suite, which includes views, panels, panelizer, page manager, context, and display suite. And, of course, those get us a fair bit of most of the face of the site done. We, of course, use feeds and the various components of feeds, so feeds JSON parser, feeds temper, feeds self-node processor as well. And, of course, that just helps us to pull in the content a lot more effectively. We use Search API and Search API Solar for most of the searching components. Media, of course, just for the essentially for the widgets for just sort of handling, adding media across the site. We use the commerce module in ways that we'll define later. And, of course, the majority of our projects, we use features, of course, and that's our way of capturing any of the configuration that is needed in the project. All right, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Great. So now I'll briefly discuss 4 or 5 features that really made the development process of this site unique and challenging for us. The first, as Chris alluded to when he started, there were really 2 sites under the globalchange.gov umbrella. There was a site, NCA 2014 on a subdomain, and then there was the www site. So ForumOne led the development on the www, and another group worked on the report site. But we wanted them to share some features, so we put them in a multi-site environment. They share one database with a few tables shared mainly for kind of single sign-on for administrators to make that a little bit easier. And on the back end, we're using Solar in order to power a global search for both sites. And so the user interface for that global search looks like this. So on the www site, you can enter your keywords and then choose which site you want to pull results from. The next feature was an integration with the GCIS API. So our goal was to populate Drupal with content from the API available on data.globalchange.gov. That API makes data available in a number of different formats, including XML and JSON. We use JSON and use the feeds JSON path parser importer in order to pull that data into Drupal and map it to fields within our selected content types. Feed self-node processor is a module that we used because the API was sort of set up as a two-hop. In other words, we needed to make an API call to get a listing of content, and then we needed to make a second API call to get all the details related to a single record. We used Feed Stamper because we needed to do a tiny bit of data massaging once it was pulled into Drupal. And an ongoing challenge that we continue to face is finding a good way to track the metadata between the two systems. So that's definitely something that we're still working on. So this slide shows what a report looks like on GCIS over on the left side of your screen. They do make all the data available in HTML too. And then once it's pulled into Drupal, this is what it looks like on the www site on the right side of the screen. The next feature is that we wanted to provide a nice interface to allow users to drill into very scientific data as quickly as possible to find what they wanted and was most relevant to them. So we did that by coming up with an architecture to define separate content types and then apply vocabulary terms or taxonomy terms from 6 different vocabularies. And then we used Search API and Facet API to build a facet interface so that you could quickly drill in. So that's what this screenshot shows. You can kind of see the facets over on the right. Topics and regions and organizations over on the lower right are all taxonomy terms. Because taxonomy plays such a huge role in this site, we really wanted nice one-stop pages that kind of encompassed all the information we could present about a given term. So our strategy for that was to create really rich, beautiful taxonomy term pages. And we did that using panels and Page Manager to override the default Drupal system taxonomy term page and then populate it with all kinds of content that's relevant to that term. So this is an example of one of our topic term pages. Next, because a lot of our content included scientific terms that not all of our audience members might be familiar with, we wanted to provide inline definitions to those terms so that users could simply mouse over a term and get the definition right on the page. So we used the Lexicon module to provide that. That module gives us a text formatter, and then it maps to a vocabulary where all the terms and term definitions are stored. And when you apply the formatter to your content, it just automatically drops the links in and provides the markup with the definition so that you can just hover over and see the definition. The module also provides a nice glossary page that lists all the definitions and all the terms used on the site. So this is an example of how that module works. Extreme weather is a taxonomy term. The term definition is in that yellow bubble. Next, a few of the reports needed to be available for users who wanted to order a printed copy. And we wanted to provide a familiar experience to users in order to order those copies. And so we wanted to do a shopping cart. So we used the Commerce module in order to provide that interface, which gave us a nice interface for both the user and on the administrative end for fulfillment. It was a little tricky to wrangle Commerce into allowing us to order free products and not process a payment or a transaction, but we were able to do it. And so this is a screenshot that shows a report that can be ordered just by clicking on the Add to Cart button. And now Keenan will talk a little bit about our development workflow.
Sure. Just to say a little bit about the development workflow, essentially we use agile methodologies for this project. There was a total of 8 development sprints. One of the sprints was where there was a testing sprint, and there was also a QA sprint. We have well-defined branching strategies that we use. Typically, we use a 3-branch model. So we have a master branch, which is essentially our development branch, and this is, of course, where ongoing development is happening, and it's, of course, tied to the development server. We have a staging branch, and essentially this is what we consider the stable branch. And this is, of course, where we have our bug testing happening, and this is where we can sort of hopefully catch things before or prior to deploying to production. And the final branch is our live or production branch, which is mapped to the live environment. And this is, of course, tagged off for different releases from the stable branch. We also, of course, have local development environment set up. We typically use Vagrant, and that just sort of is a nice way to give us an environment that essentially allows us to mimic the server configuration and the server setup where the actual site was going to live, so it helps alleviate any surprises as we develop code. And of course, it also assists with sort of linking any changes that we build to the various development, staging, or production environments. And for that is the last point of we use continuous integration. And we use GitHub for, of course, the repositories are Git, so we use GitHub for hosting those repositories. And we have the Capistrano, which handles some of the automated deployment strategies and functionalities to allow us to essentially be able to push branches and have automated migration or deployment of our changes to the various environments, and sort of do some of the lighter lifting with moving the code and running any of the typical drush commands that we normally run when code is being deployed. From there, I'll speak a little bit about the hosting of the site, which was also done. Of course, with the based off of the web traffic that we were expecting to get from looking at the previous release of the NCA report, as well as the IPCC report, which had about 80K hits. We were estimating that essentially we'd have about 100K visits, page views, and about 10,000 plus report downloads, and we pretty much hit that and exceeded that in the first 24 hours of the site being released. Of course, to handle that load, we had various caching methods in place. One of them, of course, the most basic one is this alternative PHP caching, or APC. Of course, we use Varnish and Cloudflare. And of course, Varnish being our localized caching method, and Cloudflare being a sort of a delivery network caching level. We use Memcache to try to cache as many of the database calls as much as possible to keep that down. And we also had sophisticated cache clearing rules with Varnish specifically. So what that allowed us to do is clear cache on sort of a smaller scale, depending on which code is actually being updated. And this is sort of with the assumption of any hot fixes or anything like that with the production site. And it essentially allows us to only clear caches that are relevant for the components that we're deploying and not the entire site, which was a huge help in keeping the cache up and in place as much as possible. And of course, one of the also, I guess another very good thing that was in place is we pre-warmed the cache, which essentially we had crawlers that would actually go out and crawl the entire site to essentially create cache versions of as much as possible. So that way the cache was sitting there and warm and ready for public hits, as opposed to allowing the public to sort of start generating that cache. And what that translates to is essentially during our launch day, only 5% of the traffic that was actually coming to globalchange.gov was actually delivered, or traffic that was handled by the actual Drupal site itself. And the rest of that traffic was essentially satisfied by the various caching levels. And with that, I will turn it back over to Sarah, who will talk about the launch.
Yep, so I'll just give a few details about the launch. On May 6th, we were front page news in every major media market. Google Analytics reported some of these sites as our top referrers. So as you can see, major media organizations, but also organizations like the Weather Channel. The report and website were also mentioned in broadcast media. Thanks to the White House PR team, morning shows were given the opportunity to have their meteorologists interview the president on climate change. So we got a lot of traffic just based on the URL being mentioned on broadcast media as well. We also got a big boost from social media. This is probably our favorite tweet about the project, so it certainly helped to get a nice retweet from the president himself with our URL in it. At a stakeholder event for the report release, the White House stakeholder event, the Podesta gave our team a shout out, so we were very thrilled to see that, and definitely glad to see that the White House appreciated all the work of our team over many months. And just a few statistics about launch. In the 48 hours after launch, we did about 250,000 viewers, and then we had about 850,000 page views. In the first week after launch, we moved about 2.5 terabytes of PDF downloads of the report itself. So just to talk a little bit about what's next for the project, we continue to expand the GCIS integration with additional content, additional data, and to try to, as I mentioned before, kind of work out some of the metadata tracking issues that I alluded to. We also continue to just deepen the content and add more to the Explore section on different topics that users might find relevant and useful. And we continue to look for ways to best support future reports on this site. And perhaps Glynis can speak a little bit more to that if there are any specific questions. And with that, we'll conclude our prepared presentation and open it up to questions.
Great, thanks. This is Chris. Is Adam or David there to take Q&A or lead the Q&A?
Yeah, I'm here. David here. Yeah, to start off, I had one question. It was an interesting strategy to crawl the site to pre-cache the pages before members of the public hit them. How did you set that up?
Sure. Essentially, we just had a crawler script, and another member of the team actually can get even more of the basics or the details about that. But essentially, it's just a script that allowed us to essentially crawl the entire site and just basically use the typical strategies of essentially going to every page, extracting every URL possibility from that page, and essentially calling a page hit on that. And we essentially just let that spider the entire site sort of, and just that alone, of course, as it's going through those pages, it's essentially creating the request that's basically going to cache the pages and all the various components that that we're caching essentially.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I'm sorry for the technical problems we had, but it sounds like Bruce managed to step in, and it seems like the meeting's gone pretty well. So thanks. I'll open it up to any other questions.
This is Bruce. I put a question on the chat. I'm wondering if you had any budget to do infographics or content generation beyond the, pulling the images that were available to you.
I could take that one. We really didn't spend a lot of time doing infographics. On the regions and topics pages, we did do a map that divided the U.S. into regions, the U.S. and its territories. I should be more specific about that. But it's really just intended as a navigational device to allow people to figure out what regions they're interested in, click on it, and then get routed to a term page all about that region. But that's really the only feature on the site that I would consider an infographic. Obviously, we're pulling a lot of data from GCIS and including a lot of images that appeared in the report and that might just be parts of or research that supported the report. And so I'm sure that scientists would probably consider some of those images infographics, but from a data storage standpoint, they are image files that are just embedded into our templates.
And this is Glynis. Thank you, Sarah, for that. We for the part of the globalchange.gov development, we didn't have at USGCRP any budget for that. If you look at the NCA 2014 sub-site pages, there are some interactive graphics in there that were developed specifically for the report by the team in North Carolina. April and Angel are on the phone as well. And then also just to note that we have plans to expand our suite of interactive graphics in the future as part of an indicators project that we're preparing to launch.
Yeah, thank you. I think people underestimate the value of that kind of graphics for people who are just approaching the topic from the first time.
Absolutely. We wished we could do more.
Thanks, Bruce. Does anyone else have any questions?
So it looks like there's one in the chat. So did we harvest content from the report itself? I guess that's sort of a little bit of what they were just speaking to. Of course, we were using the imagery as one source of the content that was pulled essentially from the API, but essentially many of the even more information is available in the API, and we were pulling that in as much as possible in the site. And of course, the way that the report site was built itself, it sort of allowed the user to step through different components of the actual report itself. So, of course, we didn't want to do much more than was already sort of very orchestrated in that delivery. I don't know, does anyone else have anything they wanted to add to that?
Also to note that the report itself, the sub-site for the report itself, globalchange.gov, and the API were all being worked on, finalized, and polished up simultaneously. So one of the things that we've done since launch is to ForumOne has added the multimedia part of globalchange.gov, which pulls a lot of those all of the NCA images and the metadata directly into a viewable gallery from the API.
Great. I hope that covers your question, Jim. So there's a question from Bruce. Did the site get a spike in interest this week?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the analytics. Have you looked at it, Keenan or Sarah?
I haven't taken a look at it myself.
We generally see that Mondays are our biggest days, and it tapers off through the weekends. That's just a typical pattern that we get. But we might have gotten some more things this weekend. I did get a lot of Google hits this weekend, and I have a standing thing set up for National Climate Assessment. So we'll take a look.
Great. So I have another one. It seems like you serve a lot of file download content with the report. Did you have a particular caching strategy for that, or how did you approach serving that amount of file downloads?
Actually, that was another point of the site where Cloudflare was actually really helpful in caching that, because essentially we could essentially have that external Cloudflare service cache that. and it did a great job of being able to keep this site up, even though you have those long sort of download requests happening of the report in various forms. Because some of them, essentially the way it was broken up is the entire report was available in a low resolution and a high resolution version, and the high resolution one, of course, had the hardest imprint on just the size of it. And we also broke up the report into smaller sections. And of course, the design behind that is that hopefully if people were interested in particular sections as opposed to the entire report, then that's a way to reduce the download happening if they go just for the sections that they are interested in.
Right, so you were using the CDN really to distribute that amount around as far as possible within Cloudflare?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool, thanks. Any other questions? There's one from Cian. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Is the filter tool used on a variety of pages a standard filter Drupal tool? Is it page level or driven by site-wide metadata? By topic, by publication year.
I didn't quite catch the entire question. The filtering or the faceting was used on a variety of different pages. Those are Search API-driven views, and then we're using Facet API in order to provide the taxonomy term and content type filtering. And it definitely was a design pattern that we used on multiple views throughout the site.
Right. So essentially it's faceting on Solar index content is the way it works.
So I jumped in a little late, but so you said you had two sites and you were sharing content but using Solar. What were the two sites and how did that work?
We have one site on a subdomain that supported the NCA3, the report specifically, and then we also have the www site, which provided a lot of supporting documentation and content for the report, and is also intended to have kind of a longer shelf life and support future reports. We put them in a multi-site architecture so that they could more easily share content. In the end, the main feature that pulls them together is kind of an interface that allows you to search both sites at once, and that's provided by using Search API, searching the Solar indexes for both sites, which are independent, and then we're using Search API pages in order to kind of build that interface.
Cool. So it's essentially a shared index that, depending on the result, takes you to one site or the other.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing. Maybe Keenan heard that a little better than I did.
Yeah, I did. And yeah, you're right. Essentially, there's both sites have Solar indexes, and they're able to share the indexes on either site.
Okay, thanks. To anyone who didn't hear that, I was just asking if the index is shared, and then clicking on a particular link takes you to the particular subdomain. So, okay, Bruce has a question. Is there something you would do differently if you were starting today?
Other than dramatically more time and or different products being completed in sequence instead of all together? I'm not sure. ForumOne, what do you think? Or April and Angel?
Sarah, I'll let you answer.
Okay, I would say it's possible at the end of the day we did not need to set up the sites in a multi-site architecture, especially since we're now considering splitting them up. When we started the process and decided on that architecture, we had kind of greater plans for sharing content than what we ultimately launched with. And right now it is not technically necessary for those two sites to be in the same database. So that's potentially one thing that I might rethink if I were to approach the site build again.
So are you using the main module to provide the multi-site or some other approach?
Sorry, was that a question? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, so are you using so how are you providing the multi-site architecture?
The current multi-site architecture is actually provided in similar ways, the similar Drupal way, in that they both have the same Drupal core code base that they're sharing, and of course each site is a site instance in that sort of sites sort of folder. And essentially from there, they have some modules that they both share that are common, that are of course in sites all, and then they have some that are very specific, that are only in that sort of sites instance. And then of course there's just other things as far as sharing pretty much the like databases and all those type of things. And then of course they have access to share the same Solar, which is how you get the integrated search.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Sure.
So Bill has another question. How does a new data set get into globalchange.gov so that it shows up in a search result? Does the data producer register it, or do you harvest it?
So we essentially are harvesting it from the GCIS API. So we have a feed importer set up on the Drupal side of things that every 24 hours pulls an endpoint in the GCIS API looking for new data sets. If there is one, a new node is created and the content is pulled in. And upon save, it is added to the Solar index and therefore would show up in any Solar-powered views or in the search index itself by a keyword search.
And for adding new data sets into the API so that they can be pulled into globalchange.gov, right now we've been focused on just populating the data sets that were used in the National Climate Assessment. I know that many of you at ESIP might have seen presentations or talked to some of the USGCRP team that's working on the GCIS and working to populate those things. Brian Duggan, Steve Allenbach, Kurt Films, Robert Wolf, and Justin Goldstein have all been involved in ESIP meetings. So right now we're focusing on NCA data sets. We also have a chunk of NASA data sets that you can view through, I believe you can use them at the moment. I know they're there, data.globalchange.gov. And we're working as a program the path forward for populating those data sets in the future.
Thanks. How do you select the data sets you want to import from the API? Is it based on a keyword or?
From a technical perspective, anything that is added to the endpoint in the GCIS API can be pulled into Drupal. So we're simply calling a specific API endpoint and comparing the hashes of data sets that we've already pulled in to see if anything's been updated. And of course, if the hash doesn't exist yet, or we would pull a new record in. Glynis probably has a few more comments on how they have decided from like a business logic standpoint which data sets are going to be shared.
I'd say that's under discussion. We're still working out those details. This is a new model for us, an exciting new website, and an API that's growing quickly. So we're still working out how to make those decisions.
So, does anyone else have any more questions? Feel free to.
This is Bill. Yeah, thanks for the earlier response. Just a quick follow-up. So do you currently harvest from the GCMD at all?
Not for globalchange.gov. Brian Dugan is working with GCMD and others on standardizing ways to improve the communication between the GCIS and other directories like that. But I don't think that's live at the moment. But I haven't met Brian.
Okay. But that is something in the future.
In the future, we see this data.globalchange.gov growing and connecting with a lot of different data initiatives across the government. That's why it's being driven from the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which is a good position to coordinate across the different federal agency initiatives.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Feel free to jump in or use the chat. Okay, so Jim Riley asks, are you using a structured data schema for interoperability or sharing?
Let's see.
For example, RDS or...
Okay, yeah, not in the current phase. When you say sharing, are you meaning to make the information further available to other things to consume, or do you mean just as far as social sharing?
I would think in a semantic way to make it available to other tools.
Yeah, for what we're doing now, we're essentially not offering any sort of structured SharePoints beyond the things that we're consuming, more so because our understanding is that this was not supposed to be a tool that would essentially try to replace the API. It would just sort of definitely leverage it in really clever and visual ways. But of course, I'm sure everyone would be open to new ideas about that.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, he says thanks. Anyone else with questions?
This is Glynis, just to note that the API can be viewed at data.globalchange.gov. And it's on GitHub as well.
Thanks. So does that repository include the whole site, or is it certain technologies used in the site?
I'm probably not the best one to answer that question. It doesn't include everything that's in the site. It includes a lot of the content types. For example, for the NCA3, all of the figures are in there, all of the chapters, all of the authors. The metadata for the figures is being populated, and it pulls information from various places. And then globalchange.gov, which we call the front end, is used to make that information pretty inaccessible and easier to navigate. So data.globalchange.gov doesn't include everything, but it includes a large portion of the chunks and bits and pieces that are part of the NCA and our image library for globalchange.gov, for example.
That's great. It's definitely great you're sharing that. So thanks for flagging that up. So so we've still got 10 minutes left. Does anyone else have any more questions? Feel free to jump in if you do. So it seems everyone's questioned out, so just like to say thanks to all of your team for coming in today and sharing this with us. It's really awesome to hear about it. And thanks to Bruce for filling in when we started out. And all the attendees. It's great to have such great participation today. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Well, from ForumOne, we're pleased to have the chance to talk about it. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much.
Be interested to see how the site develops in the future. So, our next meeting is on Wednesday, October 22nd, and we'll be sending out details of that on the mailing list and the site on groups.drupal.org. So look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, everyone.